Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Batya, AOC made an interesting admission this week. While doing the media rounds about the Republican struggle to nominate a Speaker of the House, she made an explicit reference to the Washington coercion machine that is mostly only alluded to. Take a listen.
I do think that in terms of some of those conversations, I mean, listen, some of us in the House of Representatives are independent in certain ways from our party. And I do believe that in some of those conversations, there are things that are happening on the floor. These machinations are happening on the floor. And sometimes the leadership of your party, in this case, the Republican Party, will be making claims in order to try to twist arms and get people in line.
Did you hear that? This clip has been circulating since Tuesday, and I didn't even catch it the first time I saw it. But here, AOC makes explicit reference to herself as, quote, independent in certain ways from the Democratic Party, and that as a result, quote, sometimes the leadership of your party will be making claims in order to try to twist arms and get people in line. Now, AOC was clearly making reference there to the Republican holdouts who are being whipped like a French meringue into backing McCarthy as Speaker of the House. But AOC is also revealing more than she might have intended about her own personal experiences with Democrats. As I explained in detail yesterday, many on the left wanted progressive Democrats in the House to deploy the same force the vote maneuver rebel rebellions are now using to deny Pelosi the gavel back in 2021. But they didn't. AOC in particular offered a range of excuses for her inaction at the time, excuses which have only grown more stale over the years. She claimed she needed to reserve political capital for the fight for 15, which failed, and to secure committee positions, which they did not get. In fact, by failing to show they meant business, it seems obvious now, in retrospect, that progressives taught establishment Democrats that they could be walked over and demeaned with impunity. And that's exactly what we've seen during the Biden administration. For example, Biden began his term by immediately walking back his commitment to a $15 minimum wage. And look, if you think I'm being unfair and that it's really Republicans, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin that are to blame, recall that despite assurances from veteran Congress members that the minimum wage did satisfy the requirements of budget reconciliation and could be passed as part of the American Rescue Plan with only 51 votes, Joe Biden started signaling as early as February of 2021 that he thought his parliamentarian would decide the matter differently, and lo and behold, she did. Even though the parliamentarian's advice has no binding authority and past presidents have fired parliamentarians who did not advise in accordance with their policy priorities, Biden's administration seemingly jumped at the opportunity to scrap the wage raise. Chuck Schumer stripped it from the American Rescue Plan. Bernie tried to get it back in, but doing so took 60 votes, not 51. And, you know, we all remember how that went down.
Miss Sinema, no.
But let's not forget, some progressives considered withholding their votes for the American Rescue Plan entirely as a form of leverage to force establishment Democrats to finally raise the wages for America's worst paid workers. Wages that, by the way, haven't been raised since 2009. But as Time reported, House Progressive Caucus leader Pramila Jayapal talked them out of it. Quote, progressives have been sort of pushed to the margins so often in politics that I think we may have gotten used to that, Jayapal explained. And so people are very inclined to say, oh, this happened again. We didn't get everything we wanted. But she taught her colleagues to realize we should take the win. We should take the win. Did progressives have to have their arms twisted to get them in line there? Or was Jayapal able to get by with a somewhat softer touch? 5 months later, Pelosi demonstrated unambiguously aggressive coercion techniques that left AOC crying on the House floor. It happened after AOC voted against funding Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system on the grounds that Israel stood accused of human rights abuses and war crimes against Palestinians. But in stunning C-SPAN footage, you can see Nancy Pelosi in pink engage AOC in a spirited conversation. When the vote was retaken after that conversation, AOC had switched her vote from no to present. You can see her appearing to wipe tears away in this clip of her being comforted by Barbara Lee.
On House Resolution 483 amendment, he votes nay.
one knows exactly what Pelosi said to AOC or how she twisted her arm to get her in line, but something certainly happened here. And I'm guessing the tools Pelosi used were more stick than proverbial carrot. When asked to explain her tears, AOC wrote, "Yes, I wept. I wept at the complete lack of care for the human beings that are impacted by these decisions. I wept at an institution choosing a path of maximum volatility and maximum consideration for its own political convenience. And I wept at the complete lack of regard I often feel our party has for its most vulnerable and endangered members and communities." Sure, but at the end of the day, she fell in line, and she never revealed what Pelosi said to her, in effect, protecting Pelosi from having to be judged for whatever threat made the young Congress member cry. And that's a choice in and of itself. Later that year, progressives were steamrolled again when another piece of must-pass legislation, the Build Back Better bill, was bifurcated with all of the social safety net parts of the bill that progressives wanted in one half and all of the establishment-friendly infrastructure projects in the other. There was no reason to do this, of course, other than to damn the human infrastructure projects and strip progressives of their leverage. But once again, Pelosi and Jayapal were on the scene, whipping progressives into submission. For a while, progressives claimed they would hold the line and not vote on the traditional infrastructure bill without the human infrastructure bill. But in a move that surprised absolutely no one, Manchin killed the human infrastructure bill. Quote, "We have been saying this for weeks, that this would happen," Representative Cori Bush told MSNBC. "Having coupled together the two bills was the only leverage we had. And what did the caucus do? We tossed it." Well, I feel sorry for Bush if it weren't all so predictable. It was clear to many of us on the left that the last moment of real leverage the progressives had was the force the vote moment, during which they held Nancy Pelosi's gavel in their hands. Having not acted on that threat, they spent the next 2 years being dismissed and bullied like the powerless empty suits they had become. Power, after all, concedes nothing without demand. And from the start of Biden's administration, the progressives made it clear that they would not be demanding anything at all. The disrespect progressives have suffered as a result is incredible. AIPAC and its allied pro-Israel fund, DMFI, worked overtime to fund corporate candidates to run against progressives. And the Progressive Caucus, not just the Democratic Party as a whole, but the Progressive Caucus, led by Pramila Jayapal, endorsed those DMFI candidates against frontrunners like Nina Turner in Ohio. Keep in mind that Jayapal and Turner worked together on the Bernie campaign. What a betrayal. Whereas once the Democratic Party prioritized protecting all of its members, saying it would blackball vendors who worked for insurgent candidates that dared to challenge Democratic incumbents, once progressives became those incumbents, the rules seemed to change. Now the litmus test for party protection is no longer, are you the front runner in an open contest or are you the incumbent, but are you the right kind of Democrat? Hakeem Jeffries has a pattern of backing establishment opponents to progressives in primary contests, and even started a PAC with conservative Representative Josh Gottheimer to protect incumbent Democrats from primary challenges from their left. Jeffries actually stumped for Nina Turner's opponent, Shontel Brown, on the campaign trail, and he has been openly hostile to progressives for his entire career. But despite all of this, progressives, powerless progressives, are clapping, tweeting, giggling, and eating popcorn enthusiastically as they vote again and again for Hakeem Jeffries during the House Speaker proceedings, with no sense of irony whatsoever. Congressman Bowman tweeted, "McCarthy must be red as a tomato right now from the embarrassment of getting fewer votes than Jeffries." But aren't you, Congressman, a progressive, embarrassed to be uncritically supportive of a man who has worked so assiduously to undermine your colleagues or prospective colleagues in the Progressive Caucus? Instead of selfies, shouldn't this be a moment for stolid self-reflection over how you ended up a mere spectator for a power struggle waged by much less principled people than you, but which could result in more power than you've ever leveraged in Congress? As one journalist put it on Twitter, it's rather pathetic to watch Democrats and leftists gloating about the fact that the Republican Party seems to still allow for a tiny amount of dissent and debate, while their own party is an absolute authoritarian Borg that demands lockstep allegiance from its members. Indeed. Now, there is some glimmer of hope. AOC, at least, seems to realize that there are leverage opportunities for progressives in this moment. As the vote stretches on and things become more dire for McCarthy, it's likely that the conversation will shift to one about an alternative unity candidate, one AOC says she might vote for if she gets some concessions, like committee seats. Now, this is smart, but it bears noting that this is literally the power that progressive media figures like myself were begging progressive electives to understand they had back in 2021, back when Democrats held both chambers in the White House. AOC is poised to bargain for committee seats, maybe more. But imagine what progressives could have gotten if they were the ones dominating a news cycle for days or weeks, demanding popular benefits for the American people. What if it was them and not Lauren Boebert demanding the country's attention? What could they have achieved? Well, we can only imagine. Pachi, this is obviously a stick in my craw.
Wow. That was incredible. I mean, you just brought so much to the table that I never would have thought about it that way. I was all prepared to defend AOC, and then you brought up the Iron Dome vote, and I remembered like how dispiriting it was. Like, either vote against it, have your beliefs, stand up for your principles, insist that we should have a more robust debate about funding the Iron Dome and funding to Israel, which we should, right? And stand for that, or, cave, stand against it and take responsibility for your decision. Instead, she voted present and then burst into tears demanding sympathy. It was it was just really, really appalling, I think. I will say, all right, so here's sort of where I think the defense of the kind of establishment move would come from. Look, we live in a country that is very robust in the debates that regular Americans are having. We're divided between, Democrats, Republicans, people who are socially conservative, economically protectionist, and then, as I always like to joke to Robbie, about 3% of Americans are libertarian. But when you have a situation like that, that's so divided, I think that's a good thing, right? That's democracy. People in swing districts, people who can appeal to independents are always going to be more important. And I don't mean that from a values point of view. I just mean that simply from a numbers point of view.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Exactly, because, Nancy Pelosi once very meanly said about AOC's district that I think she said a glass of water could win that, Democrat could win that district, right? Really, really mean, but also, it's like not 100% inaccurate, right? So, and I think from that point of view, the move here, which I'm sure you don't agree with me about this, but I think the move, what AOC her final move of saying, hey, why not think about realignment possibilities here? Why not think about, who we can think about on the other side who might want to partner with us through the establishment, right? Circumvent establishment Democrats and get to those populist Republicans, maybe, right? Get seats, in that sense. I think that's a real power move. And I think somebody like Representative Ro Khanna, who we're going to speak to today, really seems to me to be making strides in that way. And I think that there's just so much you can accomplish. Like, I'll never forget when Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley together demanded a second round of stimulus checks for Americans. It was a real power move. The two of them getting up there, the representatives of populism on both sides, and saying, look, Americans are still hurting. They're still suffering. I think there's a lot of common ground there.
Yeah, I certainly can appreciate what the establishment Democrats' motives are, and I can appreciate why it is that someone like AOC would even stay mum on the ways that she's being pressured and coerced behind the scenes if she was in fact getting substantive things in exchange for it. But I think what we've observed over the course of the past year, that while that was thrown out there as the excuse for why AOC wasn't taking the same adversarial approach that she and the rest of the squad members said they would take, and which was the whole reason for them being elected in the first place, that nothing has really come of it. And so now the question is, at what point do these squad members stop staying silent about the ways they've been pressured behind the scenes, stop being silent about the way they've been coerced, and have the kind of open debate that is now happening in the Republican Party on the House floor, you can say that that's embarrassing, but I think a lot of people are craving that level of energy and democracy and transparency that is happening. The problem with what Republicans are doing is that they're arguing over things that I don't think are as substantive or as core to what actual working Americans are prioritizing right now. But if the shoe were on the other foot, there's no reason that the progressives couldn't be using an opportunity like this to really push their message home and get the American public to side with them over Nancy Pelosi, who was clearly twisting arms in private and causing a lot of stress and chaos among progressives in the party. So we'll see if this is a tipping point of sorts. I'm skeptical because it's been a long time of them keeping their head down, but we'll continue to watch this.
Yes, we will, and we will have more Rising right after this.